Hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm extraordinarily happy to welcome Karen de la Carriere again. Hello, Karen. How are you? Hi.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Hi.
And are you going to tell them all to subscribe and send me money? You know, that's.
You know, these shows, this kind of action is done completely voluntary. It's all done. It's done from the heart because it has to be voiced, and it's a kind of a legacy. These days, one leaves one's word on video and on YouTube rather than a lonely stone in a cemetery where people just see born, died. A true gentleman, they would say of Johnny.
Well, I hope they would.
Imagine having tons of videos that educate unknown people we'll never ever meet, but they change their way of thinking because they watch the video. That is good. So John is dedicated to keep going with all of these. And what I want to ask you is, please subscribe. That's the first thing. We want you as part of our audience. We want you. Hit the subscribe button, and then a little bell will flash on the screen. The bell, if you click it, is notifications. When John does a new presentation, you will be notified. It's not a spam. You're not going to get any kind of offers or anything. You just hit the bell, and all you get is John's notifications. Can you please become a patron? Even if it's something like $5 a month, hit the patron button and subscribe so that there is some revenue for John to survive on for all his work. That's the business out of the way. Now let's educate and enlighten you.
So I suggested that we might talk about the way that language is used in Scientology. And you know, how many class 12s were actually made? I was told initially there were 24. Is that right?
You know, as a grand total from 1971, when it was first, there have been 50, a grand total. About 15 of them are dead, 15 or 20 died, 15 or 20, most of them got declared SP. 90% of them got declared suppressive person. Like St. Hill, all the old St. Hill, 95% of old St. Hill ones got. Imagine that you, John, you can't even imagine how brutal the internships are to get to 10, 11, 12. You burn the midnight oil, you video. You have no day off. You study, you practice. Finally, you reach the pinnacle in training, which is what I did. But I went further than that. I became a class 12 CS.
Yeah.
So I managed the class 12s. And of those, to my knowledge, there have only been 8 in the whole world that reached that. You might know the senior CS FSO, Rich. You would know him. He was at St. Hill in the 70s. What's his name? Begins Richard Reese. Richard Reese.
Yeah. Who was I believe was when Bill Clinton said he was at Oxford with a Scientologist. It was Richard Reese.
Yeah.
But he audited me. He was auditing me and Van Morrison. We were his only, because I'd complained about the level of quality. So in the morning he'd go and talk to Van Morrison, who of course left shortly afterwards. And in the afternoon he'd get me. So I don't think he did a very good job. But he died a couple of years ago, didn't he?
Yeah, he died a few years ago. Cancer.
Yeah, yet again.
And another class 12 CS, Alan Kartinsuski, who was the CS of the Lisa McPherson tragedy. He even made it to, in fact, I more or less trained him. He died of cancer. Yeah. So out of the 8, we've already accounted for 2 who died off of cancer.
6 to go.
Anyway,
the point I wanted to make is that nobody got further in Scientology than you did. You are one of, as you say, 8 people who reached the very top of this. So extraordinarily well qualified to talk about the subject.
yes, but John, I didn't know how to think.
No.
Doesn't matter what I was thinking. I didn't know how to think, because what happens in Scientology is your personal thinking, your personal truths are confiscated. And your truth must only be what the Guru Hubbard says. You cannot think beyond it. And Hubbard wrote something about every subject. Window cleaning,
the bars, how to clean windows, yeah.
How to do laundry, how to manage your budget, how to think of art, how to have a relationship, how to end a relationship, how to write up and report to your best friends, rattle them under the guy's knowledge report. Mm. Every subject you can think of, he wrote about. How to sweat out poisons from your body. Yeah. How to talk to your attached spirits and send them through the volcano experience. Hubbard wrote about it. But once you become an adherent or follower, you cannot have your own truth. You must only have Hubbard's truth. Give me a couple of comments on that, John.
Yeah, the Sea Organization contract, the 1,000 million years, that's the American billion. Where I come from, a billion's a much longer time than that. It's a million. But the American one's taken over. 1,000 million years, you promise to uphold and forward command intent, at the same time that you've been guaranteed that you will become self-determined. So, yeah, and that ultimately came to the truth rundown after we were gone, where anything that disagrees with Hubbard, even though it's your own experience, and Robert J. Lifton called this ideology over experience, where you sacrifice what you've actually seen and done and say, well, that can't be true because Hubbard says it isn't true. And anything that disagrees, it must be dreadful. When you find one of those hundreds of contradictions that Hubbard brought up over and over again, where he can, he's making a conflictual statement with himself, you then get the technical degrades policy letter, which says everything is true, everything is to be considered as if it were in present time. You can't say this is older than that. And so you're kind of completely stuck in the mind of this madman, this guy who could not, he couldn't keep his mind still. He was, all over the place, believing one thing one day. And the idea of language, I dragged out this. So I read this George Orwell piece. This is from, it's from an appendix to 1984. I'm a huge Orwell fan. I read most of his novels as a teenager. And the only one I don't like is 1984. I think what he tells us there is the most important thing he said, but the way it's written, because he was at the end of his life, he didn't have time to redraft it. So it's not very well written. So I'm going to apologize about that, but I'm not going to apologize about this. When I talked with the late Margaret Singer, the Berkeley psychology professor, many years ago, we both had come to this conclusion that this is one of the most penetrating statements that we'd ever seen. It's just a paragraph. It comes from an appendix called The Principles of Newspeak. So Orwell,
I hope Spike will put it up on the screen, right?
Well, she will be able to, because I've typed it up. I was so, just before we started talking, I thought I'll type it up so that Karen can see it first. Yeah. So the idea is you've got INGSOC, which is English socialism, which is the party that rules everything in Oceania. And they have invented Newspeak to get rid of old speak. And it says, the purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and mental habits proper to the devotees of INGSOC, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. It was intended that when Newspeak had been adopted once and for all, and old speak forgotten, A heretical thought, that is, a thought diverging from the principles of Ing Sok, should be literally unthinkable. Its vocabulary was so constructed as to give exact and often subtle expression to every meaning that a party member could possibly wish to express, while excluding all other meanings, and also the possibility of arriving at them by indirect methods. This was done partly by the invention of new words, but chiefly by stripping such words as remained of unorthodox meanings. To give a single example, the word free still existed in Newspeak, but it could only be used in such statements as, this dog is free from lice, or this field is free from weeds. It could not be used in its old sense of politically free or intellectually free, since political and intellectual freedom no longer existed.
Mm.
And I can remember rereading that after I left Scientology and sort of going, yes, Scientology's kind of unusual among religions. I don't think it is a religion, but that's a matter of opinion. It has this book, which is nearly 600 pages long, and it has this book, which is nearly 600 pages long. And these are all redefinitions. So to add to that, what Ron Hubbard himself said in a policy letter called Propaganda by Redefinition of Words, he said, a long-term propaganda technique used by socialists, communists, and Nazis alike is of interest to PR practitioners. I know of no place it is mentioned in the PR literature, but the data had verbal circulation in intelligence circles and is in constant current use. The trick is, and then in capital letters, words are redefined to mean something else to the advantage of the propagandist. And 600 pages plus 600, nearly 1,200 pages, all generated by one man. That's never happened. Even Shakespeare did not generate that many new words, even though he runs to the hundreds. Do you know that the word factory comes from Shakespeare? It's an abbreviation of the word manufactory.
Oh.
There you go, very useful knowledge, that. So we have words that prevent us, inhibit thinking. And part of that is done by reversing meanings. Part of it is done by finding completely erroneous meanings. So one of my favorites is the word postulate. It gives you the idea. Now, the traditional English word for postulate is a wish. And if you approach it from that way, it's like a fairy tale, a fairy story, a silly idea. You know, we're going to wish for things and they will happen, you know. What he gives us is a self-created truth would be simply the consideration generated by self. So already in language, I'm already baffled by what he's saying here. Why can't he just say what he's talking about? But that would be too simple.
That word postulate reminded, sorry, am I interrupting you?
No, it's fine.
Can I give you a little, can I just trigger?
Interject.
There was a wonderful couple who tried for 20 years to have a child and they just couldn't. And then finally they had in vitro fertilization. Yeah. And she got pregnant and they were over the moon. And then while she was in the 3rd trimester, she got the news from the hospital that that was not her baby. They had implanted the wrong, because it's all done in labs, the sperm, and it was somebody else's egg and somebody else's sperm. So just as she was about to have a baby, it was taken away from her and she was told, it's not your baby. And Scientology Regis just moved in with vulture claws and said, you see, it was your postulate.
Yeah.
Give us $50,000 and we will have you change the postulate. This is some of what Scientology sells.
$1,000.
You want a baby? Give us money. will make you fertile and will make you, just the word postulate just reminded me, they will sell you what you say you want to handle. That's the essence of it. You know the issue, find the ruin and tell them that you can solve that ruin. You know all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One word that is completely reversed is the word freedom, John. In surveys, Scientology just bought a survey to find out what the public, the word freedom came up a lot. So Scientology really bumped this, right? The bridge to total freedom. I think we've discussed this.
Yes, the total freedom.
More and more trapped, more and more trapped, more and more trapped. So here's the reverse happening of what is promised, right? Trapped. I think giving up your personal truth for any guru is walking into a trap, right? The difference between Scientology and other practices and other cults is they maliciously retaliate if you speak out about their dirty little secrets.
Yep. I mean,
there are other cults and you come and go from them, but Scientology puts up hate, malicious tissues of lies on the internet, on their freedom site. So
freedom site, yeah, exactly.
They can't let go of you. Even when you're long gone, they're still connecting with you with their hate sites. They cannot let go and just write it off. They can't.
It's something that the dreadful Keith Raniere's Nexium also did, and we can see, I mean, he uses words like suppressive and being at cause, and they do exploration of meaning, which is very much a simplified auditing process from Scientology. But they too ferociously pursued opponents, and in fact, as the group still persists, even though he's been sentenced to 120 years in prison, they're still out there. You had the same thing with Aum Shinrikyo, where you had the sarin poisonings in the Tokyo subway. Their leader, Osahara, was actually executed a couple of years ago, but the group still exists, and it's probably larger than it was when he was there. And they were going out and killing people. They had a heart surgeon who was killing people at the behest of Osahara. So that this malevolence, there are groups historically, but there are very few of them. And Scientology, right from the beginning, you know, certainly as early as 1950, Hubbard is already going after people who he considers are his opponents. It's nothing to do with, you know, the whole thing about the Sykes that started in 1950. He basically the second wife, who he didn't have, according to the shrinking world of L. Ron Hubbard, and he had a first wife and a third wife. She sued for divorce, and she had a psychiatrist do a report on him, and that was the triggering moment for him to go, right, these psychiatrists there. And as he says of the suppressed person, they generalize. So this one psychiatrist had written a report about him, so anybody who was a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a psychotherapist was now evil, you know. So he fits his own definition.
But he begged for psychiatry in those letters you researched.
Yeah, he wrote a letter to the Veterans Administration talking about the balance of mind having gone, and he desperately needed help, and he certainly desperately did need help. But I don't think anybody could have given it to him, because I think his psychiatric condition was so complex that he was not able to accept help. Reminded me of an Alan Watts statement, another spiritual fraud. I feel.
Alan Walters?
Alan Watts.
Oh, Watts.
Not the fattest man in Scientology, but he was huge. But Alan Watts, the Anglican vicar who took Zen Buddhism to America, he said that whenever you follow a guru, you've got to realize that you are letting them pick your pocket and sell you your own watch. And I think that's such a beautiful statement about all of these gurus and what they're doing, that, you know, you're selling water by the river, that whatever there is to learn,
Mm.
you have to become your own guru. We're not born that way, but we have to grow up, become adults, become mature, become parents, become responsible citizens.
Mm.
And any of these groups, Scientology, Nexium, Om Shinrikyo, they take over a parental role. And in Hubbard's sense, I mean, when I talked with Mike Rinder a few months ago, and he talked about arriving at the Apollo and realizing that he'd been trafficked, that he'd been sent out to do the flag executive briefing course and was told, oh no, that's changed. Yes. And now you belong to us. And he's, what, 18 years old and has no money. They've got his passport. You're going, Hubbard in 1952 in the Philadelphia doctorate course, sit and listen to me for 6 weeks and you've got a doctorate. There's an easy way to get a doctorate. It's only $500 as well, a real bargain. 38 people took that course, by the way, only 38. But on that course, he says, we have ways here of making slaves. And then in the early 60s, he writes to Kennedy and says, do you want to buy my brainwashing techniques? And that contradiction always there. I wrote a paper a long time ago called Scientology, Religion or Intelligence Agency. And it isn't a religion in any positive sense of the term,
I think what bothers me most as I transitioned out of all of this and tried to reboot my head, I had to really restart it, switch off all the way my motors were thinking and evaluating. I always was a straight A student, so academically I was not stupid.
Right.
I wasn't stupid. Yet many people say, how did you solve what? It wasn't even what I was thinking, John. It was how I was thinking. Yeah. I lost all ability to look for an objective truth or a scientific truth or a truth that could be proven no matter what. There was no truth that I could hold in my head. It was only what Hubbard said. And sometimes we really wonder how people, even after they declared SP, run back and do ADE and beg. They've been cut off from their family. They've been cast in the wilderness and they beg to return. There have been people who went to Int Base to extract a person incarcerated there. And the person doesn't want to leave. The indoctrination, this is when you've lost all ability to think. And Hubbard said, you are a sociopath if you want to leave the SEAL. You're antisocial. You're a criminal. You're SP. And you swallowed that.
I mean, I still hear Scientologists using the word blow instead of leave. And they say, I blew Scientology. And you go, well, look that word up. It means, excuse me, having to leave because you have committed transgressions, overts, as they call them. And how is it that Hubbard had to keep moving every few months if this is true? How many times did he run away? The evil being who had to hide, as he put it in his lyrics for The Road to Freedom, because of his evil purposes. But it becomes and people will leave the SEAL organization having been enslaved for however many years. And then it'll be demanded that they pay a freeloader bill, having worked a 90-hour week for years and taken nothing. They'll find themselves paying thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars to be back in the good graces of the group that abused them, which Hubbard actually did talk about. There's a point where he says that people will respond to the group that last abused them. And that's why the loyal officers are one of the great confusions of Scientology as to whether they were working for Xenu or on the other side, because he starts imitating this idea of the loyal officer because it's meant to be, you know, an evil force. And a lot of this, it's, you know, I had critical thinking abilities when I got to Scientology. I knew my Socrates and how to do that kind of stuff. What I didn't have was an understanding of a very particular aspect of psychology, which is called the feeling of knowing. Noesis is the fancy word for it. William James talked about it at the beginning of the 20th century and said, people believe they know. And, you know, I give the same example. I've been giving it for years. When I was 17, born again, spent 2 hours chatting with me and trying to convert me. And I just happened to have reread the Gospels out of amusement because they're quite short and very interesting, a lot of good stuff in them. And but I was not a believer. And he was exasperated at the end of 2 hours and he backed away from me lest I leap on him. I don't know why he was frightened of me. Nobody needs to be. And he looked at me and he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. And there was the contradiction. I don't know it. I don't understand it, but I know. And that is noesis. That's this sense that this must be true. Yeah. And it drives extreme views of every kind, Nazism, the Bolsheviks, the feeling that this must be true. If you look at the Cultural Revolution, where teenagers were burying their professors alive in China, they were beheading their own parents because Mao had given them this idea that the party, you know, what Pol Pot would call anchor, was that you had to sacrifice yourself to that. You look at the way that the Christian church over the centuries has had people sacrifice themselves to the wealth of popes and some of these despicable, awful people. You know, the 6 popes of the Renaissance, the period of Michelangelo. And you look at the things they did. You know, instead of Julius II, he was the first pope to lead his army into battle. And you're going, how does that fit in with the Prince of Peace notion? But these dreadful people get others to believe, who are sincere and empathetic people. You know, that's, for me, having interviewed so many of the people who worked with Hubbard now over the years, such nice people, such decent, caring people who really wanted to change the world. And I long ago came to the opinion that perhaps the worst thing that Scientology and the Moonies and the Krishnas and the Way International and Maranatha, all these dreadful groups, that what they'd done was they'd taken the cream. They hadn't taken the idiots. They'd taken people who not only were bright people, but people who really wanted to change the world. And people, if we'd been in the right place, and now we have somebody, you know, say like Ira Chalef, who is changing the world, you know, whose goodwill has gone out into the world with courageous followership and intelligent disobedience. But so many people were wounded by Scientology instead of being able to give their gifts to the world, their talents to the world. And it's a terrible shame. But here we are, we're giving something now from what we learned from those wounds, you know.
Yeah. Well spoken.
Thank you.
I think that when something cannot be proven and it seemed bizarre or strange, the Scientology response would be, well, it's spiritual.
Sacred science.
Yeah. But I think when I reset my entire way of thinking was when I realized that you cannot swallow something because so-and-so said. I remember one person talking to me and saying, Karen, do you believe in VTs? Do you believe in Ron's attached spirits? Do you believe in VTs? And I said to him, why do you want my opinion on it? Have you not formed your own? And he said, well, if you told me it was true, I would then believe in it. And I said, no, you're back to guru thinking. If Karen said there are BTs, there are BTs. But I want to go back on truth and lies, John, because it's such a fundamental. I think everybody in the world, in their heart, has some. The way you think is the way you make decisions, and the way you make decisions affect your life. Because I believed, and you know, there was no excuse for me because I had listened to all the Class 8 tapes at St. Hill before I signed my billionaire contract. So I heard all the sci-fi fantasies and everything, but I had already swallowed it that, you know, the saying in the Sea Org is, what does Ron say? If you're querying something at all,
what
don't
would Ron do?
research.
What would Ron do?
What would Ron do? What would Ron do? And you're
He'd run away and take the money.
Yeah. And I think that most people have an innate feeling of justice versus injustice. That's why juries are so diligent in making their pronouncement on guilty verdict. These are fundamental basics within us all. And the truth and lies is just so deeply embedded. But people have, because they can't think straight, they will swallow the lie. Do you have a very simple educational coaching in 2-3 sentences that can help people who are just swallowing what they get as truth?
I just so happen to have opened a file here that is something I've been quoting to people since before I was in Scientology. This is the text from which Hubbard somehow came to the statement, what's true for you is true. But this is, as ever with Hubbard, this is not at all what was said. This is a statement made by the Buddha, so somewhere around 500 BC, and it's called the Kalama Sutta, or Sutra, and it was delivered to the Kalamas, who are a tribe of people. And it says, believe nothing on the faith of traditions, even though they have been held in honor for many generations in many places. Do not believe a thing because many people speak it. Do not believe on the faith of the sages of the past. Do not believe what you yourself have imagined, persuading yourself that some God inspires you. Believe nothing on the sole authority of your masters or priests. After examination, believe what you yourself have tested and found to be rational, and conform your conduct thereto.
But there's no testing.
Well, what you found.
There's no testing in the cult of Scientology.
No. And
querying or challenging Hubbard, whoa.
And I mean, as you said when we last spoke, that when people, you know, when we say, look, there are no operating thetans, there's nobody with supernatural powers, there are no clears by Hubbard's definition of a clear. People still catch colds, they don't have perfect memory, they don't have perfect emotional equanimity, there are no releases, there is nobody who can communicate freely to anyone on any subject, certainly in Scientology, where you're forbidden to talk to suppressives, and you can't talk about your case, and you can't talk about the technology, that's verbal text. So everything is conflict and contradiction. And whenever you or I say that to a believer, they say, didn't you have wins?
Yeah.
Every day of my life, I have realizations of one kind or another, usually to the effect that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. You know, that's a cognition that I have on a daily basis. But the idea that, you know, that which is good in your life comes from the guru, the cult, the teacher, the leader. And the idea that what doesn't work is because you didn't apply the technology correctly. Well, you know, which technology? The technology of harassment, because that's a very developed technology in Scientology. I was talking earlier today with Mike Rinder, and we're talking about the public relations technology, and just saying, look at Hubbard on camera. Look at him. He was saying when James Phelan wrote the first real investigative piece in, I think, 1963, Hubbard walked around boasting that the Saturday Evening Post was going to do this great piece about him. That's what he thought from his brilliant insight into another human being. And Phelan was the first person to point out loudly that Ron Hubbard was a charlatan who was lying about his biography because he'd gone and researched it. So Hubbard couldn't read people, and he was rubbish at public relations. He was rubbish at marketing. He was rubbish at singing, that's for sure. Thank you for listening. He wasted 2 years of Chick Corea's life on that stupid album. A great musician who could have been doing something useful instead. He was a rubbish photographer. He was a lousy poet. He was a dreadful writer. And he's kind of going, okay. And this is the man who's saying, just be like me.
But look at in his wake, because of this one thing, belief of the truth. Look at the organizations that still exist, and look at the dedicated 5,000. Talking about Sea Org slaves, let me give you a little. Did you ever meet a girl called Jeannie Franks, Jeannie Beaufort, Jeannie Sonnenfeld? No. Did you ever meet her? No. She was sort of a household name in Scientology in the 70s. She married Bill Franks. He was later appointed as executive director international. You probably know Bill Franks.
Yes, I've been in touch with Bill every now and then.
Yeah. Bill has passed.
Yeah.
Jeannie was married to him at one time. And she and Bill were sent to Washington, D.C. to boom the org, which it kind of did. Anyway, Jeannie and I were totally best friends. Every girl should have one close girlfriend, and Jeannie was it. We were on the Apollo together. We did many what we call libs, a day off together. We crossed the United States together in a car when we were both in the RPF. We were transferred from Clearwater prison camp to Los Angeles prison camp. Rehabilitation. Look at the word, talking about lies. Rehabilitation. Hard manual labor and 5 hours mandatory indoctrination. Okay. Jeannie was in through thick and thin. At one point, Jeannie was commanding officer of AOSH UK before her brother, John Danilovich, was made commanding officer. Jeannie was commanding officer. She absolutely was devastated at the death of her third husband, Jens Beaufort, who died of cancer. And she got into some, to convolute, I won't get into the whole story. Anyway, this is it. She was in 50 years. And the last 20 years, she was the executive director of Cincinnati Org, putting Cincinnati on the map. She was on stage. She got presentations of Best Ideal Org. She's in the glossy magazines. I'm going to, let me send some nice pictures to Skype, to Spike. Skype.
I did that.
Right. So she did 50 years. She did maybe 55 years. And John, brace for the next statement. She has just been declared a suppressive person. This is the end of the road of 50 plus years in this. They didn't know she was suppressive as she worked 60, 80-hour weeks. All, doesn't Scientology say they know how to shut? They know how, don't they say you how to detect an SP? Don't they say you the PTS-SP course, which they force you to do over and over again? People have done it 3 times. So they didn't know Jeannie was a suppressive person For the 50 years she slaved. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I just want to pump in case somebody views that Jeannie was such a household name. I just need her to know there is an Aftermath Foundation and they will give her a soft landing and they will let her land on her feet. She's probably tending to her husband, David Sonnenfeld, the Australian, who has fourth stage cancer, who's dying of fourth stage cancer. But we're talking about lies and truth. Jeannie swallowed it all. She swallowed it all for 50 years. And Jon, what is the end of the road of someone who has slaved? I slaved 20 years.
Yeah.
So I can read. Jeannie, give me some comments on the Jeannie Sonnenfeld story, please. Just in the little anecdote I just told you, looking at truth, lies, freedom, trapped. Give me a couple of wise Jon Atack responses.
Wise Jon Atack responses coming up. I can only agree with you that the suppressive person and potential trouble source detection course evidently is not tremendously effective. I remember when our friend David Mayo was declared in 1982, my mum was involved in Scientology. She came in to see if what I was doing was safe and got herself caught up in it. And I remember her commenting to me at the time, how could he be in Scientology for 25 years and Ron Hubbard didn't notice this? You know, if Ron Hubbard is that now, and it's true when I left because I don't normally, I've never named him publicly, but it's known now that I'm a close friend of Ira Chalef, so I might as well. Ira Chalef.
Oh, Ira, yeah.
And the reason I left Scientology was because I was summoned in. I can't remember his name offhand, but he was somebody who'd known Ira and worked with him for, I think he said 15 years. And I was summoned in to St. Hill and told down in the south of England in East Grinstead, told I'd got to go, and it was really important. Peter Shantz.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I sat down with Peter, who I didn't really know, and he said, there's a rumor that Ira is going to be declared suppressive. And I said, oh, well, that's not a good idea, is it? And Ira had actually been on leave of absence working for me. I had an artist's agency at the time, and he was helping out. And so Peter was very, this is a terrible thing, and we'll have to fight it. I remember him saying that, we'll have to fight it. A week later, he summons me back in, and, you got to come in and can't say it over the phone and all of this nonsense. And he said, Ira's been declared. And I said, how do you know? And he said, there's a list of, I think it was 611 people or something. And he's on the list. I said, where's the suppressive person declared? He said, there isn't one. I said, where's the bill of particulars? There isn't one. Where are the findings and recommendations of the committee of evidence? There isn't one. Well, why are you sure that he's a suppressive person? Last week he was saying we're going to fight it. He said, well, they can be so devious, these people. And that was it. That's all I got. That he'd known and loved this wonderful man 15 years or whatever. And now he was willing to throw him overboard because his name was on a list. Speaking of checking the evidence and what's true for you is true. So that it is a terrible problem that somebody commits decades of their life. I gave 9 years, but I wasn't in the Sea Org. I wasn't humiliated and abused. I had a pretty good time of it, really. It just, took my money and messed my head up. So it was no great loss. It was very instructive. I'd rather it had happened a little faster. If I'd been a wiser person, I could probably have made the same gains in about 3 weeks. It wouldn't have taken the whole 9 years to realize. But there is something tremendous in the sense of release for anybody, for however long they've been involved, that some people go, I've wasted my life. And I've met a lot of people who told me that. I could have done so much else. And you say to them, look, and I'm not a Buddhist, I know I'm sounding like one at the moment, but because this is the second reference. The Buddha grew up in a palace where he had everything and he was protected from old age, disease, and death. He never saw any of those things. And he could have lived his whole life that way. And had he lived his whole life that way, the transformation that he caused in the world, and as I say, I'm not a Buddhist, I don't think it's a good idea being celibate, and I don't think it's a good idea being a monk or any of that stuff. So there, I've said it. I was a Buddhist as a teenager. But nonetheless, the wisdom that he brought into the world, into a relatively barbarous society, has sustained. And part of that wisdom is the idea of compassion. So had he had a lovely life, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did. And I think for any of us that, I mean, you've managed in the last few years to have a tremendous impact on the world, a positive impact that nobody in Scientology could have. And that's as a consequence. I mean, Joseph Campbell will talk about going into the, going and getting the wound so that you can come back and help people. And I think that's true. For me, the wound came in opposing Scientology. They spent 16 years harassing me and grinding me into the dirt. But it's nonetheless, that's the vital experience that I have, that I without that, I'd have very little to say and very little usefulness. So even if you'd spent 50 years involved in this, you have actually, without knowing it, accumulated wisdom. And the wisdom is probably the opposite of what you thought it was, because it is about going, oh yeah, I can be my own guru. How can I help other people to think for themselves, which is the same thing? How can I help people to question their certainties? I want to say something else about the stupidity element. I had a friend who has a PhD in physics, who spent 30 years involved in a Hindu group, which abused him horribly. And he came up to me and he's like, how could I have been so stupid? Got a PhD, how could I have been so stupid? It's got nothing to do with intelligence. If you look over history, look at somebody like Isaac Newton, who is probably held to be the most influential scientist of all time. He was a nutcase. He spent more time doing alchemy than he did doing science. He spent more time going through the Bible, trying to find a code that would show him the proportions of Solomon's temple, which he believed to be the proportions of the universe. So he also gave us, laws of thermodynamics and optics and all sorts of wonderful things as a young man. But it could be that all the mercury he took as an alchemist got to his head. Galileo, who is held up as that's science versus religion. He had 2 children. He put them both into a convent. So that's how much against religion Galileo was. He also, and this is true of Newton as well, they both invented a huge amount of their work, so that whenever the Principia was revised, there are 2 revisions during Newton's life, he improved the results tables at the back. He lied. About half of Galileo's experiments are fraudulent. If you actually do take a bag of lead that weighs the same as a bag of feathers and you drop it from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the lead will reach the ground first, because it's not simply weight. There's also air resistance. How large is the object? And there are various things going on here. So that was a lie. And it's a lie that science is based upon. I bring that up to say these people were not stupid. They were very, very clever people, but they were fallible, and they wanted to be acknowledged for what they were doing. Newton, in fact, would have been executed had his religious belief become known. He was a Unitarian. He didn't believe that Jesus was divine, and that was an executable offence in the late 17th century in this country. We've got a little bit further since then, not far enough, but we're a little more civilized than we used to be then. But so some very, very clever people get caught up in things, and it's then what have we learned and what can we give? And when I some years ago, 2015, helped to kickstart the Open Minds Foundation, I reached out to ex-cult members you know, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Scientologists, what have you, believing that they would flood because of their wisdom to help me to teach to the world these simple principles, to, you know, to the next generation to prevent recruitment. But I found out that people are actually just obsessed with Scientology and going round and round and talking about it forever.
Yeah.
So there's an end to that. There's a point, you know, which came for me in about 1991. I decided that Scientology is a microcosm. It's just one of the little elements of authoritarianism, of controlling people, of having people who believe they ought to be God on earth, or Ron Hubbard, you know, or Sun Myung Moon, or what have you, and that other people ought to do what they want, Mao Zedong, Hitler, Stalin, been lots of them, and people who believe that they need somebody else to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Predators and prey.
Yeah.
And for me, the lesson, and the lesson that we can teach to the world because of our experience, is you don't have to be a predator and you don't have to be prey.
Yeah.
You know, you can actually try and create a proper democracy where people are not, you know, caught up in emotional passion and fervor. I've got somebody at the moment who I did a great talk with Jamie DeWolf the other week. That guy is so much fun. I love him. Who, of course, is Ron Hubbard's great grandson.
Yeah.
And he's just fantastic. He's just great. But somebody said, "Oh, you don't seem to like Donald Trump," and it's like, well, no, not particularly. What's to like? And I've suddenly got this barrage of things coming on about, you know, how great Donald Trump is, and I'm kind of going, I just don't feel that passion about anybody. You know, I'd much rather look at it and say, well, I think tariffs on China was quite a good idea. I think the way he dealt with Kim was a little bit strange. I'd rather look at it point by point, and I'm not going to go, well, you know, crooked Hillary or Joe Biden this, or I'm not very keen on any of the presidents or any of the prime ministers or any of the kings of any of the places in the world ever. I'm very happy to say, you know, I think the New Deal was a good idea, but I think FDR was an alcoholic, and that's not really a good idea. And, you know, there are, as Benjamin Franklin said, you draw a line down the middle of the paper and you say pro, con. And when you get to the point where you've only got pros or only got cons, you've been conned.
Yeah.
Basically, because there is no superhero human being. You know?
Indoctrination is, it's only pro, and it's flawless, and it never makes a mistake. And the only reason the tech didn't work is you are connected to a suppressive person. You are PTSD. You.
Yeah.
Finger is pointed. So that was very good, John. That was very, very good. It's so fatal to glom on to some celebrity or a guru or whatever as the and create a filter that you will only see through their eyes and only take their truth. That was what cost me 40 years of life. But you know the old saying, and to summarize what you just covered, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
just like to point out, the man who said that spent the last 15 years of his life in a mental hospital because he had syphilis, which definitely didn't improve his health. It was Nietzsche who said it. It was Nietzsche. And beating children isn't good for them. But it's certainly true that that which you survive and integrate and digest, very definitely. And just a thing about imitation as well, the idea of, you know, the guru and doing what the guru says. When Ray Charles was a young man, the great Brother Ray, one of the most remarkable musicians in all of history, I think, if you listen to his first records, you kind of go, that's Nat King Cole. He was trying, and his manager eventually came to him and said, look, you can be a Nat King Cole impersonator all your life. I mean, it's uncanny, the thought that somebody who'd got that much soul going on would be singing these quiet sort of, you know, and I love Nat King Cole too. Absolutely wonderful. And Brother Ray broke out and he became Brother Ray. And what's significant in this story is that to be the fullest you have to become unique. It's no good being, you know, a Freddie Mercury impersonator. You've got to develop yourself and the unique qualities that you have as a human being. And that's true not just for artists and musicians, that's true for anyone. That everybody has within them their own talent, their own genius, and it's refining that and encouraging that and bringing it forth rather than cloning yourself onto Ron Hubbard, who wants to be
absolutely right on, right on the nose. I think we hit a good beat there, Jon.
Yes. So we better declare we've had a win, see if our needs are floating, write a success story and pay for our next course, don't you think?
Oh, Jon, I don't feel bitter at all about those 40 years. If there's one thing I got out of this life, which will last me through eternity, is you don't fall for a guru, no matter what. That was a valuable lesson learned.
Yeah, become yourself, and you've done it, and you're a great person. You know, I met you first few years ago, and I was bowled over. You know, I knew about you, but when I met you, I sort of went, "What an incredibly sweet human being." You know, and that was how I came away from our meeting, and that's what our conversations have also provided. So you became you. You know, no matter whatever else was going on, you became you. I was asked to ask you a question, which I think is probably irrelevant, but somebody pointed out to me a week ago that you're still listed as a member of an organization, which I'm told I'm not meant to laugh at the name of. It's called APIS, which I think is a very association.
No, that got deleted. That must be some from the Wayback Machine. I was completely deleted off. Is that an Australian Michael Moore site? Absolutely not. Have him send you a present time link.
Well, no, I mean, I just wanted to confirm to the population of the world that you are no longer a Scientologist.
Oh, I am not a Scientologist. In fact, in the most ludicrous way, Scientology has declared that you cannot call yourself a Scientologist. This is a precious word of theirs, but be that as it may, I am not a Scientologist.
No, I'd like to indicate that we are not Scientologists.
We are not Scientologists.
Okay, it's been great having this conversation as ever, and we will switch.
Hope to see you in a month, Jon.
Yes, we'll see you in a month's time. And
I'll see you in a month's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would like to just tell the audience, please subscribe, stay with us. If you can even make just a one-time donation, click. Any small donation helps Jon. It's a long journey. There's a lot of research, a lot of work, and background stuff to maintain a channel like this. So if you can help, even on a one-time basis or a patron basis, please do it.
Great.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. If you've come this far, you're one of us.
You're not a
We're asking you with a rope to stay with us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So
bye, Jon.
See you, bye. Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
What would Ron do? And you're
He'd run away and take the money.